Great stuff. So we're recording. Good morning again. I'm going to hand straight over to Craig.
Brilliant, thanks, Angus. So the topic for the session today was, Angus said, all we agreed was a bit of back to basics with Skore, but I see we've actually got quite an experienced audience on the session today. So I think there's a couple of bits I think are still valuable in terms of the basics to go through. What I'll do is I'll do reinforce the sort of 5-step approach that we use, but I go through it very, very quickly, mainly for the benefit of the recording. And then I think it'd just be sort of any questions that you guys have that we can explore. Let me share my screen. Okay, that's apologies, not the right screen. Okay, hopefully you can you see Skore on your screens?
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so when I talk about going back to basics and the process mapping basics, I thought what I'd do this session is actually take even one step further back and just talk a little bit about what we mean by a process in Skore, and how you create a process, and what happens when you create essentially one of these cards on the screen here. So what I've got in front of me now is obviously the standard workspace view, and it says processes at the top because it's showing us a list of processes. When I talk about a workspace, the way I have traditionally described a workspace is, as well as being your list of processes, it's typically a company has a workspace. So you might have your own workspace for your organization. Potentially, if you're doing some sort of consulting work with other clients, you might have separate workspaces for each client. And the nice thing about having multiple workspaces in that way is that for each workspace, you have to set up a set of users for each one. So it means that you can very securely keep content separate if you're working across multiple businesses. But as I said, typically a workspace, a business has a workspace. Now, within the workspace, obviously, we've got a list of processes. And when we talk about a process, I mean, essentially in Skore, a process could be something as simple as, a very low level tactical type process, such as your monthly expenses process, or it could be something big and strategic, or like a value stream that describes a whole organization from a very high level into which we can drill down in. So again, a process could be a single diagram, or it could be multiple diagrams that are all linked together hierarchically. Now, when you look at the list of processes, we see what we call the cards here, these sort of squares, and it has the name of the process on it. It shows us who the owner of the process is, and I'll talk about that in a second. If a process has been published, that will be highlighted. It will tell you when it was published and by who. If it hasn't yet been published, and again, I'll talk about the difference between that later, it will tell you when it was last edited. And then you've got an open and edit button here. Now, next to the open edit button, there's a little drop down which gives you what we call more actions. And again, I'll talk about that in a second. But the reason I bring this up is a lot of people don't realize that button's there and what's available in it. So I'm going to start from the beginning and I click new process. And when we start a new process, the most simple information you need to put in is the name of the process. So I'm just going to call this the weekly drop-in session process. On a create process. So what it does in the background, it goes and creates that process in the workspace, and as soon as it's done that, you'll see this card appears at the top of the screen. So I'm going to go back before I open the process. We know when we open it, it's just going to be blank, but before I open it, I'm just going to click on the little drop down and again go back to this menu to talk about some of the things that are available in here. So when a process gets created in the workspace, the first thing that Skore does is it assigns it a unique ID. So it's a unique ID for this particular workspace, and then it has other information against it, such as published, purpose, and comments. So the actions you can take in here, and some of these will depend on the level that you have, the plan that you're on for Skore, whether you have these. But I can set access rights, properties I'm going to come back to in a second. Add preview image is actually something that's unique to my version of Skore, so nobody will see that. Tags, so tags are these, if I can just go back here, tags are these tags at the top. So if I want to group processes together in my workspace, so it makes it easier to find them, I can add tags. History allows me to look at the revision history. A usage diagram shows me a graph of how many visits there have been over a period of time. I can pin the process to the top of the list. If I do that, that process will always appear at the top of the workspace when you come in, which is really good if you want to set landing pages that everybody sees every time they arrive in the workspace. I can duplicate a process, or I can archive it. Now, just for the purposes of this, I'd like to just talk about the properties section. So if I click on properties, I'll open this little window here. And what I can do in properties is very simple, but I can change the name of the process. And then I can also change the URL of the process. So you see in the address bar, when we designed Skore, we designed it to use URLs that were descriptive. So if anyone was sent a URL, for example, in an email, and you clicked on it, you can see, like, hopefully you'll be able to see what you're going to get when you click on it. So these are all editable. Obviously, changing the name changes the name of the process. It doesn't automatically change the URL, so you'd have to manually change that if you want to. But you need to just be aware that when you do change it, if you've shared that link with anyone, that link changes, and so you may have to update people or update where that link is. The process owner field down here, you can put one user as a process owner, and it's a fairly passive field in Skore, but when you create a process, it automatically adds you as the owner, but you can add any other user from the workspace here. And it doesn't do a great deal other than say, you know, I've said this person's the owner, you put the name against it, but I can use that data within the processes themselves. In the future, we have some more kind of workspace level reporting capability will be coming into the product, and there you'll be able to report on, say, process by process owner, but that's not quite available yet. And then the last field on here is what we call the purpose of the process, and it's really just a description field. Yeah, you can type anything in. It's just a free text field that allows you to you know, as I say, it could be a description or a more specific purpose statement for that process. Very much like the process owner field, it's a little bit passive in that you put the data in and it just gets stored in the database. It doesn't do very much, but we can use that data in other places. So within the process, we can make it appear automatically on the page, and I'll show that in a second. So I haven't made any changes here. I'm just going to click cancel to drop out of this, and then I'm going to go into the process. So I'll click on the title, or I can click on the open edit button. It doesn't matter, either of those will open the process. And then from here I will go up to edit, start editing, and then before I go into the process mapping basics part, I just want to show you those two fields that I mentioned. So the process owner field actually has already been dropped in here on the template, but I'll show you how that gets done. And the process purpose field, I realize now in hindsight I should have written something in the purpose field so it appears on here, but I'll show you how it works. Up here on the top right hand side where the help menu is, if you click on the help menu, in here you've got a number of things that shortcuts. So there's a field there that a button that you can click there that opens a panel that tells you all about text formatting. So that's about doing headings, bold, italics, that sort of thing. But the one I'm going to look at here is text variables. And if I click on this, it shows you the variables that are available to use in your processes. So there's a process name. So that's the name we gave it in the workspace. You can see the purpose field. So if I had put the text in, I could copy and paste that into a notes field and it would make it appear on the diagram. You can see the process owner name, process owner email, And then there's various other information that you can publish on a process diagram, such as has the process been published, what's the who is it approved by, what's the published version, and various other variables that are in there. So I'm going to just pick this process owner one because I know it's got me in there. And all I'm going to do here is select this with my mouse. I'm going to do a Control-C to copy that, or I could just type it out afterwards if I wanted to. And then on the canvas, I'm just going to drag a note box onto there. And if I do a Control-V to paste it in there, so you can see it's just that text process owner. And when I click away, you can see it automatically puts the name of the process in there. So that would work exactly the same whether it was the process purpose or any of those other variables that you saw. And just like any text within notes boxes, of course, I can add formatting to them. So if I wanted to do a header, I can do the two hash symbols, click away, and it makes the text big. Okay, so just some useful bits that worth knowing about that when you create your process, you know, and thinking about, okay, who is the process owner? Do we put a purpose into that box? This is the way you can use some of that data. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go back to the process basics, process mapping basics piece again, just go through this relatively quickly. I'm going to use, like I did when I've done this in the past, I'm just going to stick a note box on there and very quickly describe what the different steps are that we talk about, and then I'll quickly walk through them. So step one we talk about is title and scope. So that's when we're going to start mapping a process, it's really important to think about, okay, what is the name of the process? Where does it start and where does it finish? And that just helps to really focus everybody on the task at hand. So it's really good to get that done before you start the mapping exercise and get agreement on it. You may find that it changes during the exercise, and that's fine. But it just really helps. So when you go into a session with people, everybody should be on the same page in terms of what they're there to map. So the second step in the 5-step process we talk about is capture activities. And so I find it's really interesting because when you start a session, you often, especially with people who are unfamiliar with process mapping, you kind of want to get people into the flow of things, get the juices flowing, getting people thinking about their ways of working. So I always focus just on capturing the activities. What are the things you do? And generally they're relatively straightforward. Obviously you get different people in a room, different personalities, but actually people will be quite happy to just tell you all the work they do. So we tend to focus on that because that gets the whole sort of flow moving in the session. One thing we always say about capturing activities is try to capture them in terms of verb and a noun. So they're activities. So you're doing something to something. Step 3 in our 5-step process then is once we've captured the activities, we would then go back and start to think about, okay, for each activity, what's the output or outcome? And this is where you then start to use the Y boxes. So at this point, it's look at the outputs. And this is where things start to slow down a bit, because this is where you're starting to challenge the audience in terms of, okay, you've told me this is what you do. Now I want you to think about what's the output of each of those actions? How do you know when it's finished? Why do you do it? And that really gets people to think more deeply about the work they do. And it's often where a lot of the improvement opportunities come out, because people will stop and think, well, actually, this is what we tend to end up with, but it would be much better if we had this instead, or this would save us time if we did it this way. Once you've done that, you can then, once you've got your outputs, you can actually then start to look at the flow of the process and put it in order. But remember, each time you're doing this, you're kind of iterating through. So you start with the activities and you go through those. Then you go the activities and go through those. At step 4, I would then look at the who. So the who does it. Who's actually doing these activities. And again, you iterate back through the process going, okay, what role is it that's doing this? So we tend to use roles rather than names. And then step 5 is, I'm just going to call it any other information. So you might want to think about, this often depends on the context. So why are you doing this process mapping in the first place? So it might be if you were looking at implementing or upgrading a system, for example, at this point you'd go, right, okay, now we know what the work is we need to do. Let's go back through the process and talk about what the requirements are. What do we need a system to be able to do in order to to meet the needs that we have. And that's where you might start using the attachments feature, for example, for capturing those sorts of requirements. But again, you can see how you might iterate through it. And it's I find that this is how we sort of certainly set people up at the beginning. It's a really powerful, simple but effective framework. What you find as you get more used to it, and I know some of you here have been doing this for many years and will know this, that actually you start to do these things in different orders. Often when you're capturing the activities, someone will say something, you'll recognize it as an output, you'll put it on there, or they'll know who the role is, and you'll add that. But ultimately it's about building it's like building a jigsaw puzzle, and you got all the pieces and you're trying to put them into the right order. And just like with a jigsaw puzzle, you can start anywhere, but everybody knows that actually the best way to approach it is, start with the corners, then start with the edges, then start to look at the the colors based, compared to the image that you're working with. So it's a great starting point to do that. So very, very quickly, if I'm doing title and scope, so my title is the name of the process. My scope, we tend to use Y boxes. So I drag and drop a Y box to tell me where the process starts. So in this case, the weekly dropping session, we tend to start on a Monday lunchtime, where we have a meeting about the community and what we're going to do in the weekly drop-in session. And then I'll use another Y box, and I'm going to drag this over to the right-hand side. This will be my final output. And in this case, it's we tend to finish the sessions once the recording, excuse my spelling, recording has been uploaded to the community. Again, I'm not going to worry about the spelling there. So that's how we set the scope. And then it's just about focusing on how do I get from the start to the end, right? And what I would tend to do is use the shortcuts. So if you're not familiar with the shortcuts, you'll see them at the bottom. In this case, a W plus click creates a what box. And I'll throw a bunch of empty what boxes up onto the screen, and then just get people to talk about the activities. Once we've done that, you might do a quick sorting. You might move activities around just to put them in order. And then, as I said in the steps above, you then go through each of the outputs and start to talk about the outputs. Again, you get a chance to reorder things if they still make sense. Then it's back to the roles and then the attachments to add any other information. I'm not going to go into detail of putting any more stuff in the box there because I'm just conscious of time. But hopefully that gives you a good overview of the basics of the approach to the process mapping. So again, I know a lot of you are quite experienced on this particular session, but are there any questions that you've got or anything you'd like to look at?
I just, while people come off mute, I'll just add one. Thanks, that was great, Craig. Thanks a lot. Might be worth showing, just highlighting over the, talked about the additional information, the paperclip and the drop-down diagram detail.
Yeah, so let me just put some text in a box to make sure I've got some in there. So the first one you mentioned there was the attachments, Angus. So when I move the mouse over a box, you'll see that these two icons appear on the top left and right. So the one on the right is the attachments icon. And if I click on that, it opens the attachments panel on the right-hand side. There are various attachments available. I'm not going to go through any of them in any detail. I'll just pick the text one, which is the simplest one. It's a free text field, and I can add additional information I want to in there. Now, when I save that, and I can add multiple attachments, so I can have lots of attachments against one box. Once I save it, you'll see that the paperclip becomes then visible all the time. The other one that you mentioned there, Angus, is what we call the detailed view. And that's where I want to essentially deconstruct or decompose a particular step in a process. So this is where the hierarchical mapping comes in. So I want to take this activity and I want to drill down onto it and I want to map out the detailed steps within that particular activity. So again, I've got this button on the left-hand side. It's called the detailed view. If I click on there, click create detailed view, you'll see it creates a new page. It has the title of this page is the activity that was a level above. You'll see the breadcrumb gets created, so I'm now on this level, and I can start mapping processes at this level. And if I use the breadcrumb, I can then go back up, and there I can see the button is now visible as well, telling me that there is a detailed view underneath that.
Great. What I've managed to do on occasion is accidentally create one. How do you get rid of it?
Sorry, could you just say that? It was a bit echoey. I didn't.
If you accidentally create one, how do you get rid of it?
One of the detailed views.
Yeah.
So it sometimes it will disappear automatically if you haven't done anything underneath it. But if you do need to if that hasn't happened and you do need to get rid of it, I believe you go to he says edit menu. Okay, yeah. So you click on the box, go to edit menu, and it says clear detailed view. When I click that, you can see it drops off. The attachment icon, when you click on that, that should disappear if you go in and remove all of the attachments, then it should go as well.
Craig, there's a tick box there saying open as pop-up. What does that do?
So in the attachment panel,
Yeah.
let me add my text again there. This is quite a cool feature that we very rarely talk about. If I click on this and then close the attachment panel, what it does is the next time I open the attachment panel, it actually opens it right in the middle of the screen like this. So this is really useful for if you're embedding any type of maybe media rich information in your attachment. An example of that would be, say, a video, for example. So if you're using the process as some sort of training type material and you're embedding videos to help enrich that, you can put them in as an attachment and then open as a pop-up, and it means you get the video opens up like this. Alternatively, we've got a demo, if I've got time, I might quickly show you, of a where you might use the process as a dashboard and you embed visualizations in here, graphs, and again it works really well if you open it up. The reason we default the attachment panel to open on the right hand side rather than over the screen like this is because more often than not, when you're capturing attachments, you're doing them in the context of the process. So it's often much better to be able to look at the process while you're adding attachments to it. So we tend to see the pop-ups, as I said, used when the process is much more mature, like when it's been used in training. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's useful. Thanks.
I'll quickly show you an example I've got here of I think I've got a sales process example that has this. Let me check this is the right one. Okay, so in this example here, this is being used as a little bit of a dashboard. Now, you can see we've got some metrics. So we've got new leads by month, confirmed meetings. Now, these are just note boxes. They're note boxes that are manually edited or updated to be able to show that data. But in the attachments, so I click on one of these, what we're doing here is we're using a third-party analytics tool to capture data around it, and then when you basically embed it into the attachment window. So when you look at the metric, today's metric on the diagram, and then when you click on the attachment, you can then see the trend over time from that. But I said that the graph is from a separate tool, which you then drop into as a widget into the attachment here. Okay.
Fantastic. Okay. Thanks, Craig. Any other questions from anyone?
No, silence.
Silence. Okay. I was thinking. Actually, I was thinking of Tandu there with the training you've been doing recently. That pop-up could be really quite useful in terms of embedding videos and things like that. Cool.
Yes, thank you. I agree. I've been taking notes because I've seen that pop-up tick box, but I've never really tested it. So that's quite interesting. That's something we'll add in the training going forward, definitely.
Yeah, excellent. All right, well, look, we're coming up to the end of time, so I'm going to suggest we call this to a halt. You know, thanks as ever for everyone for participating. And I have to say, I personally always find I learn one more thing every time at least, and I particularly enjoyed that piece on the pop-up. So thank you for that, Craig.
I think is it worth adding, Angus, if anyone kind of has an idea of a topic they'd like us to explore on one of these sessions, a particular area they'd like to look at, it'd be good to pop that in the community, and then we can put together a session around those topics in
Definitely.
future.
Yeah, yeah. So look, I mean, I'm not necessarily. I mean, I'll close the recording now, and thanks to everyone for that. But obviously, people can stay on and have a chat if they'd like to. So anyway, but so as I say, thank you very much, everyone. I'll close the recording, but do stay on for a moment or two if you'd like to.